What is a computer virus? When you initially asked this question, I said, yikes. I know computer viruses are bad and they can really mess things up, but that's my knowledge and extent about computer viruses. So I'm kind of excited to get your definition of a computer virus. How does a computer virus spread? I'm not sure. My guess was maybe as we open different apps and different programs, or maybe it could be with downloads. Those were my thoughts. Now keep in mind to all our listeners, remember, I'm not the tech savvy one. I'm right there with you. I'm going to learn this episode with you. And this next phrase, holy cow, our master guardian's throwing out phrases lately in these last few episodes that we've had to learn a little bit about. So if you're like me and you have no idea what this next phrase is about, great. You're right there with me. If you know it, you're a step ahead. If not, we're going to get to it. How does patient zero get infected? I don't know what patient zero is, so you can make fun of me in the comments later. We're going to get to that though. What protection do we not have against these attacks? My guess is the ability to stop them because they're happening. So anyways, we've got some good questions lined up and ready to roll today. Let's go. Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I'm Nick and this is Super Simple Security Principles. Listen each week and learn how to think, not what to think. This is episode 56. Woo!
Oh,
Home
yeah.
network attacks from within. And we talked about this in last week's episode, kind of segueing into this, so I'm excited. How to stop the attacks from within, man. That's pretty legit.
Glad you think so. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Well, I mean, this episode seems super important to me, because for me personally, I feel like the first things you need to do is protect that inner circle, protect the core, and so this is what we're trying to do is address these attacks from within, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in, man. What do you got for us? I really do want to know the definition of a computer virus and how you would explain that, because we obviously know that they could get sick. They can have their issues.
That's right. Well, and yeah, so it's a little bit different. So, and what we're going to do today, Nick, is we're going to work
Mm-hmm.
through, unlike usual, we're going to work through our questions one by one in order.
Yes.
Um, Before we do, though, before we hop into that first question, I do want to give just a quick introduction because we are going to introduce a metaphor that's going to help us understand. It's a kind of what I think of as a thin metaphor because it's about a computer virus. It's about viruses, right? And we're most of us, I think, are used to hearing the word virus both in relation to humans and computers,
Yeah.
right? So this is my one sentence description of what these local network attacks are. They are like a virus spreading.
Okay.
So that's your even two, like, a virus spreading, 3-word overview, whatever, right?
Right.
So, and then we'll break it down, but that's the high level. So, what is a computer virus? Um, so to dive into the metaphor a little bit, in the human world, we talk about viruses, viral infections, there's bacterial infections, infectious diseases. They have
Yeah.
different characteristics, what they do, how they spread, how they're treated, etc.
Yeah.
We look at all of them together, we might call that diseases or sicknesses. In the world of computers, we have something comparable, malware, right? And we've
Okay.
talked about that before,
Yeah.
right? Software that does bad stuff.
Right. I love that definition. Software that does bad stuff. That's malware right there. Boom.
Yeah. And well, and the thing is, just like with diseases in the human world, it comes in a huge variety. Of
Okay.
what it does, how it spreads, and how to protect against it. And we have a lot of words for it as well. We've got, and I know you'll know at least some of these: ransomware.
Yeah.
Virus seems to be the biggest one that most people have heard of. There's also worm, Trojan, and
Hmm?
yeah, right, like Trojan horse kind of thing, and
Yep.
lots more. But for our purposes, we're just going to really kind of simplify all of it to just one word, just virus.
Okay.
And the characteristic that we want to focus on is that a virus, a computer virus, is a kind of malware that wants to spread itself to as many devices as possible and do as much damage. Like, it wants to spread.
Okay. It wants to spread.
Yeah. Now, that's not exactly terribly uncommon. Not
Right.
every
Right.
malware does, but a lot of malware does, just because for obvious reasons. Um,
Yeah.
but so lots of malware has multiple, uh, categorizations. It might be a worm, a virus, and a Trojan, or whatever. But anyway, uh, worm is also the other really common word to describe this kind of malware that likes to replicate itself and spread.
Yeah.
But anyway, virus is the word I think that most people heard, and that's part of what that is. So we're going to stick with virus today. So that's our definition of what is a computer virus for our purposes of this episode. Is it's just malware that wants to spread.
Okay. Malware that wants to
That,
spread. I can handle that.
okay. Now, second question: how does a computer virus spread? I can't remember what your. Oh yeah, no, I do remember your speculations, and those are mostly right, except they are more of answer to question 3. So we'll bring back your answers in for question 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So the way they spread actually goes back to kind of the foundation that we talked about at the start of this series, and we've been talking about throughout. It is these phone calls that devices make to each other to
Yeah. Yeah.
communicate,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
right?
Yep.
And very specifically, we talked in episode 52 where we were talking about the attacks that originate from the internet that are trying to target devices on your home network, but they have to get through the router. So mostly they're targeting your router, right?
Yep.
And in both cases, the remote internet attacks and your local home network internal attacks, the idea is essentially the same, where the attacker is making a lot of calls, as we we're talking about them, to a device to see if that device will answer any of those calls.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah.
that's kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that's step
Seeing if
one.
anybody's home, right? Step one.
Yep. And then if any of the calls are answered, then it kind of looks for gaps in the defenses. Because
Yeah.
if it won't even communicate at all, it can't do anything. It's just cut off right then. But as soon as there's a line of communication open, then it can start, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out a way to worm our way past their defenses because they're actually listening.
Yeah.
And ideally, it wants to be able to install some of its malware on that device that it's communicating with, so it can stay there forever, do bad stuff, continue to spread, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So
That makes sense.
okay,
That
so
makes sense.
that's okay. So then question 3, and this is, how does patient 0 get infected, or you could call it device 0. So we'll
Okay.
we'll step back though and talk about what patient 0 is, because this is actually not a computer term. This is a human virus and condition. And patient 0 means uh, the first like the origin of the sickness, the first person who got sick. So like in your family, if somebody gets sick and then it spreads it to everybody, who gave it to me?
Who was
You
patient
know?
zero? I now know
Yeah,
this. Yes.
patient 0. Now,
Okay.
we don't
Okay.
usually talk about that because it's usually in the context of like bigger, like mass events or
And
whatever, I assume. I'm
right.
not remotely an expert in this topic, but anyway, that's what patient 0 is. And so I kind of adopted that term for here, right?
Right.
Um, and so what you talked about is some of the ways that patient zero could get infected if we download something bad, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about some of these in previous episodes.
Yep.
And there's a bunch, and we've talked before, and we're going to talk actually. I've identified at least 4 specific ones that we're going to talk about a little bit more in this series as we
Okay.
talk about some of the protections related to them and whatever. But just to kind of uh, focus in for today, we're just going to talk about one. And I chose it not because it's necessarily like the worst way or the most likely, because that really depends on like the specifics of your home network. But this way that patient zero or device zero gets infected is it's one we haven't talked a lot about,
Okay.
and it's growing in significance. And there was a cool news story about it too. So,
Awesome. I like current news stories.
well, it's not as current as I'd
Aha.
like it to be, but it's a couple of years old. But it's one that everybody will recognize or at least a lot will recognize the brand of, um,
Yeah.
and so that's the one I chose anyway for this. So the patient zero category is on Internet of Things devices. Which is,
Okay.
and we talked about this in a recent episode, things like smart TVs, cameras, alarm systems, appliances, all these other devices that talk to that connect to the internet,
Right.
but not we're not talking about your phones and your laptops, right?
Right.
The
For example, my lights that I've got on right now are connected to the internet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yep,
That'd be an example of one of the devices we're talking about.
yep. So the news story it's from May 2023, but uh, have you heard of the Ring home security system?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Who hasn't?
I would say right. Exactly. Well, that's what I was thinking. But sometimes sanity check, right? Because there's doorbells all over the Ring doorbells you see, right?
Right.
And in fact, normally when I think of Ring, I think of it just as a doorbell, but in fact, it's. I mean, if you go to the Ring website, their sales
It's
pitch, their
way
bill
bigger
is,
than that.
yeah, exactly. Like it's a whole home security system,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So this is the irony of the situation. So in May 2023, they were ordered to pay out $5 million to affected customers. Um,
$5 million to affected customers, huh?
yeah. So, and I'm going to read from the official announcement from the government's FTC website of what they did wrong. It says, Ring's poor privacy and lax security let employees spy on customers through their cameras, including those in their bedrooms or bathrooms, and made customers' videos, including videos of kids, vulnerable to online attackers. Hackers exploited those vulnerabilities and harassed, insulted, and propositioned children and teens through their Ring cameras. Some hackers even live streamed customers' videos.
What?
Yeah,
They only had to pay out 5 million for that?
I know it seems pretty.
That's
Yeah,
messed up.
I agree. I agree.
That is
So
messed up.
now I didn't look into all the details of exactly how many people were affected or whatever, but yeah, it's well, and for me, the thing that makes it worse, I mean, obviously the content, the kids, and I mean, just the nature of it is bad. But then from a security perspective, it just makes me shake my head because, like, they're a security company, but
Right.
they don't know how to keep their own devices safe.
And it seems like they just let the hackers infiltrate their system.
Well, I'm sure they didn't like want to. There was no way this
Right.
was any
But
good for them. But right, they didn't prioritize keeping their own devices safe sufficiently, even though they were providing a security service. Right. And
that's
so
terrible.
and yeah, well, and part of the lesson to learn here is just because a company is providing a security product doesn't mean that they're great at security, and especially like keeping their own product secure.
Yeah.
This is true not only with hardware but software, because you have like antiviruses on your computer, for example, an antivirus scanner. Those
Yeah.
are high value targets for hackers, right?
Right. Right.
Because
Absolutely.
lots of people have them. And I don't have a story about that one specifically today, but there have been plenty of examples of security software getting hacked and piggybacked, to get malware on there.
Mm,
And so
that's awful.
that's part of the reason why I'm less enthusiastic about security software than I might otherwise be,
Right.
because it can paint a target unless they're super careful. If they're really good at security, then instead of adding a layer of protection, you're adding basically a big bullseye. So anyway,
There you have it.
yeah. So before I go on to the last question, I want to talk a little bit more about the IoT devices. Um, and
Now IoT. That's the initial
Internet of Things. Yep.
Internet of Things.
I know
Okay.
I'm beating another acronym into you. Gonna
Right.
train
Yeah.
us,
Yep.
Because and part of the reason is, so I'm glad you called me on it though, is you'll see this is the sort of thing like when you're reading news articles or whatever, they'll throw in there, and sometimes they'll explain it and sometimes they won't. And so sometimes
Yeah.
you'll see just an IoT, and it's not complex. It's just I got I got a camera, I got a light, whatever. It's nothing crazy or weird, but they like it just means a device that wants to connect to the internet. But for whatever
Okay.
reason, they have this funny name. But I want to talk about why they are great targets for that initial infiltration.
Okay. Yeah. Let's hear why. Because that was kind of my thought. Is like some of these devices seem so simple. It doesn't seem like they provide a lot of access.
Yeah. Well, and so the thing is, that's one of the things that actually makes them, you describe them as simple, right?
Right.
But there is kind of this mid range. They're not as simple as something that doesn't have to connect to the internet. Because in order to connect to the internet, and for example, like with those lights, I believe the primary reason they connect to the internet is to get updates to their software. But anytime a device is connected to the internet, that ups the level of sophistication it has.
Okay.
And then cameras, for example, is a big one. They have to, they sometimes you want to be able to live stream it, right? You want to be able
Right.
to control it, maybe give access to your neighbor if it's a security one while you're gone. Like all these things introduce complications.
Yeah.
And anyway, the short version is really that a lot of devices, these Internet of Thing devices, kind of have the perfect balance of enough processing power that you can install malware on them,
Oh, geez.
but
Okay.
not powerful enough. They're not like a full computer or even a phone where they have all the same kinds of protections that you might have on a more powerful device.
Right.
Does that make
That makes
sense?
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So it doesn't apply to all of them, but that's one of the factors anyway that applies sometimes. Um, in fact, there was a corporate story, and I didn't keep the notes of this, but on one of the security podcasts I listened to, they were talking about this, where in a corporate environment, a camera was very specifically the target, where it was running Linux, just like Mac or Windows. It's another variant,
Yeah.
but it was running a full Linux, and so they were able to install malware on there, and then spread from I think it was a camera
Oh,
there
geez.
as well. So anyway, um, the other thing is IoT devices, the Internet of Thing devices, are as we saw with the Ring, even if it's a security, product, rarely built with strong protections against hackers.
Right. Right.
And in a lot of ways, it feels like to me kind of the early days of routers,
Mm.
because we've talked a lot in the recent episodes about how much the security of routers has improved, right?
Right. Right.
But for the most part, it's not because manufacturers are proactively like, yes, let's up our security. It's because of things like the Ring incident, in the router world,
Where
where they
it
had all
forces
sorts
their
of
hand, essentially.
exactly, they had fallout, so they had to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it feels like we're kind of in that same learning curve with these other devices.
Gotcha.
That's
It makes sense.
kind of
Okay.
how I characterize it. I'm hoping we'll learn faster than with
Right. Right.
routers, but
Right.
yeah, that's still too very often the case. There's we talked also about default passwords
Yeah.
with your routers. Well, some of that goes on in the Internet of Device world as well.
Okay.
Internet of Things
Internet of
devices
Things.
world as well. And it's just like, that is the worst idea ever. We've got to get past default passwords. Never ever should we be doing that in any circumstance. It's just such a bad
Right.
idea.
Right.
But
Right.
anyway, and then the final aspect I think that makes these devices a good target is, and I guess this is all of them really, but just like the manufacturers don't necessarily put a lot of time and attention into building them to be safe.
Yeah.
Um, Consumers, when they buy them, they're not like analyzing them. I wonder how safe is this device. They're
Right.
normally counting on the manufacturer. Well, if they provide me a security system or they provide this, well, it's their job to make it safe, and they're right. It is their job to make it safe.
Right. Right.
On the other hand, if you want to be sure, the only job you can be sure you've done right is one you do yourself. Kind of idea, right? You want
Yeah.
to, but how would they know, right? You look at a
Right.
device you bring home, it's not like it's obvious.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difference with physical devices. A hammer, you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, you can gauge the dangers, right? It's one of my
Right.
favorite examples, right? You got digital devices, like I have no idea. And if if you did know, what do you do about it, right? So
Right. Right.
it's tricky.
Yeah. You're nailing
So
everything I'm worried about now. I'm like,
yeah. Yep. So anyway, that's yeah, I think that boils down. That's all of it anyway. For that question. So, you ready for question 4?
yeah. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, what protection do we not have against these attacks? And the not part is, in this series we've talked a lot about the router
Right.
and its
To
role.
block those incoming calls.
Yeah, exactly. It's the guardian for our home network.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, most routers do nothing to protect your devices against the attacks we're talking about today, against a virus spreading within your network,
That sucks.
because the attacks are already past the router,
Passed
right? They're
it.
kind of
Made
they
it through. That call came in. Somebody answered.
right. Well, or no, see, it could be like what you talked about, is you downloaded something, installed malware, or
Mm-hmm.
these other ways where we got patient zero, right?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There are a number of those ways. And yes, getting through past the router is absolutely one of them. They might have gotten through, and that is a way to get a patient zero. But there's a bunch of ways.
Right. Okay.
But then when we get to the spreading part, one way or another, right? All these come after one layer of protection was already bypassed.
Okay. That makes sense. That's what I was trying to allude to, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
Yep. No, that was exactly right. Intuition is something already failed if we're talking about a virus spreading, because that means the virus is present. And how did it get
Right.
present? Even though we have defenses, and the answer is that it depends. There's a bunch of ways, right? But
Right.
at that point anyway, the router, we're past the router and it's not protecting against that, which means that we're going to need to have other layers of protection.
Okay.
Now, of course, we're not talking about that today, as you might guess.
Right.
We want to give those the time and attention they deserve, but I've got a lot of good stuff ready. I've got at least 4 layers planned, and yeah, and one more I'm still considering, and we'll do probably a full episode for each of those.
Okay. Okay, there we go. We're
So
going to give you some great tips. So if you're in my state of frame, like, oh crap, we're going to take care of you.
yeah, well, and that's kind of the weirdness of these kind of episodes where I do a series like today. We really only have time to talk about the attacks. I always like to give you, some protection if I can in the same episode, but sometimes it's just that's the balance.
Sometimes
So
it's
you're just
just
gonna have to
being
listen next week if you want some protection.
right. Well, and sometimes it's just being educated on where you could be attacked, understanding the threats, right? Because
Yeah.
especially you talk about the Internet of Things or the IoT. Did I get that right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We talk about these things, and those sometimes don't ever cross your minds. If this could be a weak point, this could be a vulnerability. And so understanding where you're weak or where you have vulnerabilities is very important to be able to protect against those. So
No, and actually, thank you for that reminder because that's something I think about and talk, but I forgot about in this context is right. Really, the biggest difference is just, um, yeah, awareness is critical, right? That already provides you some protection, right?
yeah,
You can't
yeah,
can't protect against something that you don't really understand is a problem, and
right,
so that's true. Even when we don't talk about the specific layers of protection, just the knowledge itself is a layer of protection essentially from a
yeah,
yeah. So
yep,
thank you. Yep.
yeah. You're welcome.
Okay.
So does that mean we've reached that point in time? Is it our call to action already?
Yep.
Let's hear it. What do we got, man?
So I want you to take an inventory of the devices in your home that connect to the internet.
Yeah, this sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and obviously the focus is not, your phones and computers, you're going to remember those. Those are ones you use and like, oh, good to note those. But specifically, we want to look for devices that might be overlooked, like your lights or other smaller things.
TVs,
Yeah,
like even my DVD player now connects to, and I'm like, I don't even ever use it, you know?
and your car.
Yeah, my car. Yeah, that's one I
Yeah,
wouldn't have thought of. Yeah,
yeah. Oh, and I didn't put that on the list because I didn't really think about it because it's not small, right? Most of the time when I'm thinking of Internet of things, I'm thinking of small things, right? And obviously
right.
your car is big, and I don't know how you'd categorize it, but there's definitely a risk there. It's communicating with the internet, and there's all sorts of risks related to that with your car. Um, that's a whole other episode, but anyway, keep that list around, and then the idea is that at least for the this series, probably ever, but definitely during this series, have you reference it, and hopefully give you some ideas so you can get some layers of protection in place for that will help for each of those devices. Is the idea.
Okay. All right, I can do that. As you were sitting there thinking, I was like, oh man, I actually have some toys. Not me personally, but my son does. He has multiple toys. Like one's a robot toy, one's another little remote control toy that connect to the internet. So I'm like, oh,
Wow.
hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. Oh, one. The little self-propelled vacuums.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've got one.
They're
Balances around. Yep.
yeah, and some of those at least I don't know if yours does, but some of them connect to the internet and can be hacked. So
Okay. All right, so there you have it. Our call to action is figure out what devices, your Internet of Things, man. Make that list,
Yep,
you know. Okay,
exactly.
awesome. Awesome. Well, in next week's episode, we're going to learn. This is what I loved about what you outlined. In next week's episode, we're going to learn about the most fundamental and universal protection for networks, and it's firewalls. And as a non-techie, this sounds crazy important because this is the most fundamental and universal. So our focus will be on teaching you the protection firewalls can offer that you may not be using right now. So please, 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 please tune in to next week's episode, because if this really is our most fundamental protection as firewalls, you'd better tune in for this one. You'd better understand. Don't miss out. like, like this is your chance to help somebody. Invite somebody to listen to next week's episode, because here we go, folks. Most fundamental, most universal. I'm pumped. I'm really pumped.
Cool. Yeah, me too, for sure. Thanks for that pitch.
Yeah, you betcha, dude. That was a good episode. I liked it. A little lengthy, man, for us.
Yep.
I like it.
Ready?
Yep.
Are you ready to take action and wondering where to start? Get my Bulletproof My Identity Starter Kit for free. The 7 most vital layers of protection everyone needs. I'll send you one step at a time and help you if you get stuck. Just go to bulletproofmyid.com and enter your name and email, and I will send you the first step. Again, that's bulletproofmyid.com.